Hi, I'm Joe Sikoriak, and we are back talking with Marianne Fake, who was the wife of our late founder, Doug Fake, and also a silent partner in Entrada since before the beginning. Marianne, great to be talking with you today.
Hi, Joe. Good to see you again. And thank you so much for doing this. These recordings and this whole series meant so much to Doug.
And we want this latest Kickstarter, our fifth in the series, to be as successful as the ones that have come before. So I thought it might be fun to talk to you a little bit about two of our favorites. As you can see up in the corner, I've got a picture of Doug with Jerry at an event in London back in 1989. I thought maybe we could go back even further and talk about, your earliest history with Doug and Jerry Goldsmith.
Well, Doug and I met and got married while we were in college here at the University of Colorado in Boulder. He was, of course, a huge soundtrack fan then. I'm sure people know the story that when he was a kid, lived with his tape a microphone to the speakers of the TV and record the music, films and TV shows that he loved. So certainly Jerry was one of the ones I remember, of course, early on, Doug talked a lot about the classic composers from the, golden age of Hollywood. But Elmer Bernstein and Jerry Goldsmith were probably the two contemporary composers he talked about the most. Doug was, so Doug loved the music before he could even get LPs of it. When he was in high school, one of his best friends was also a film music fan, and Doug's dad was in the Air Force, so they would hang out. I think it was every Tuesday when the new records came in, they would hang out at the BX and buy whatever new soundtrack recordings came in. So, Doug's love of this music goes way, way back, well before Entrada, well before there were CDs. Lonely Are the Brave, which was always one of Doug's very, very favorites. That was very near and dear to his heart. Of course, when we were first met, when we first got married, we were starving students in a small apartment. So, when Doug would play the music, it would fill a house, it would fill the apartment.
And fortunately, that you were a musician as well, so you were at least a little more amenable to.
Oh yeah. And while obviously I didn't have the depth of understanding of the music that Doug did, at least, when he would talk about the orchestration or the, particular type of instruments, or I knew at least enough to understand what he was saying. Not only how much he loved it, but how much he understood it. Doug is one of, if not the most talented musicians I've ever known. He was extraordinarily talented in his ability to hear music, his ear, what the Entrada people always certainly saw with his producing of soundtracks, his ability to hear and put together music with the right pitches, the right tones, the right tempos, was extraordinary. I mean, he was an amazingly talented person in ways probably a lot of people never actually saw.
So did you get a chance to see any of his music performed when he was writing music in college?
Doug's music? Oh yeah, well, because I played in the band. That's we met, and so I played all the music Doug wrote and was performed at the band at the University of Colorado. I was playing usually second clarinet while Doug was doing his. He wrote an absolutely marvelous variation on Jingle Bells for a Christmas concert that was just, I wish I had a recording of it. It was just in the style of the composers he loved so much, very light and kind of a little bit syncopated and just a lot of fun. Wow. A lot of fun. I loved playing his music.
So to go back, you folks moved from Colorado to San Francisco in the late 70s, I guess? Or early
yes, 1978, loaded up a U-Haul with literally probably half the space in the U-Haul was filled with LPs. That tells you how big this was to Doug even back then.
I'm not surprised.
Those suckers are heavy.
And a few years later, I guess some of that collection ended up being part of Doug's stock when he opened a table in Cinnamond in San Francisco.
That's right. He, early on, he actually worked in the IT department at a shipping company just to have a job. But early on, he found Jose Carpio, who ran at the time Cinnamon, the poster shop, and they obviously became friends. Doug loved all things movies, so The music, of course, was his big love, but he loved posters. And, he and Jose became friends. And yeah, Doug sort of started to take over the shop at Cinnamon. It became more and more LPs and less posters,
Yeah.
and ran what was then called Cinnamon Records for a while, under that name, just as a retail store. As you say, initially stuff he had. Being the consummate collector, he would get multiple copies of things. He would get backups to his backups to his backups, and so he would wind up with many copies of things. And so started out at Cinnamon Records, selling those, but then started being able to buy wholesale and sell, and then of course, the big event in 1985 when he got the idea of doing, or Entrada, when he formed his own label, he changed the name to Entrada. And that was the year our older daughter Regina was born. I still remember when we went to the recording sessions for Red Dawn, which Regina was, I think, 6 weeks old when we went to the Red Dawn recording sessions. Wow. And I still remember Basil Polidorus telling me that I shouldn't take her in where the orchestra was recording because it was too loud and it would damage her hearing. I mean, he knew that. I didn't.
But, and Regina went on to be a soundtrack fan anyway.
Absolutely. And yeah, and as I think many people know, helping out at Entrada off and on for a lot of her life.
I know that it was a lot of heavy lifting to get that first album out, and really, you could probably tell us how the next project came about, kind of unexpectedly.
Of course, it was just me and Doug at the time doing everything for both, Cinnamon Records, but then for Entrada. And one night the phone rang, and in our little apartment this was probably, we were still in Emeryville, call out to Doug. Doug, you gotta come get this phone call. Well, I'm busy or I'm doing something. No, Doug, you gotta get this phone call. It's Jerry. He said, well, I don't know anybody named Jerry. Well, it's Jerry Goldsmith. You really want to get this phone call.
I guess Doug and Entrada were willing to do release Poltergeist 2, which was a very expensive project at the time.
That's right.
Reuse fees were probably something like $50,000 when $50,000 was real money. And but Doug bit the bullet, and Jerry was so grateful that they built a relationship and did their first recording.
The beginning of what led to Items in the String.
Right.
Which, Doug had so much fun doing that recording, obviously beginning a very long relationship with Jerry. And, it was an adventure. Doug was so excited.
But then, of course, that actually a working relationship and a friendship developed between Doug and Jerry.
Yeah. And, Doug obviously visited with Jerry occasionally. I remember going to Jerry's house in Hollywood a couple of times, and going back to his studio, which was behind his main house, and seeing all of the Academy Awards and the gold records and such up on the walls of the studio. That was pretty exciting.
Yeah.
Doug was always very humble and kind, and one of the things he always did was he developed relationships with the little people. Mm-hmm. Jerry's secretary, Lois, was someone that Doug also became friends with. And I remember, a whole lot of times when, Doug would be corresponding with, or, on the phone with Lois, arranging things, arranging logistics, arranging trips to see Jerry. I remember Doug telling me he was so excited to discover that Lois, his husband, was a sound mixer on West Side Story. Yeah.
Another crew. And so that was Doug's kindness paid off in him get to know even more history and lore and connections. And I think it's important to point out that, today it may not seem like a big deal because a lot of labels have come and gone releasing these records. But at this time, other than Varese Sarabande, there wasn't anybody else who was routinely putting out classic soundtracks, catalog titles from the past, as well as contemporary. And Doug opened a lot of doors, not only with the studios, but also with the union in terms of making new deals to facilitate this stuff.
Oh yeah, where today it's not nearly as onerous to do union recordings as it was when Doug first started. Yeah, and part of it was, I think, again, Doug had um, integrity, and when he did a deal with the union, he paid what he was supposed to pay, and I
Yeah.
think in many ways they were sort of surprised that both the union, the people who hold the licenses, the studios, if Doug said he was going to do something, he did it. And even though it was often logistically or financially difficult, but it earned him a huge amount of trust in that industry,
Yes.
which was amazing.
And Entrada has gone on to deal with virtually every studio in Hollywood and a few around the world as well. So
Yeah.
it's quite a legacy.
Then there was that big recording in London in 1989.
1989, yes.
Doug was so excited to be able to do that. He was so excited with, of course, the London Symphony at Abbey Road, um, and to be able to, be there, hearing and listening and engaging, discussing with Jerry as the recording was being done.
And that recording in '89 was pivotal for a couple of reasons because Jerry was preparing his from the prologue, The Artist Who Would Not Paint, from The Agony and the Ecstasy. And Jerry hadn't really prepped any music for concert at this point. It was sort of a new thing for him. He'd done one or two concerts, but he hadn't really gotten into a rhythm of it. So
Yeah.
Doug was an encouragement and a bit of a collaborator in Jerry's, re-entry into doing concerts, which he did a lot of in the 90s. And
Yeah.
then also, as this picture here illustrates, Doug and Jerry did a panel with the Goldsmith Society, a fan club in England. And that was
Yeah.
pretty exciting for both of them, I think.
Oh, absolutely. I've told the story to people. That trip, and of course, I was in London when he was doing that. Our daughter Regina was. She was 4 years old then. The first time when we went to that panel, that discussion, and the first time anyone ever asked Doug for his autograph, and I just about fell over laughing. I said, "Why are you asking him for his autograph? That's just Doug." But it really was the beginning of me understanding how much of an impact he was beginning to have in film music circles. And yeah, the fact that he was, on a casual first name basis with Jerry Goldsmith and a number of other outstanding, talented, successful musicians. And he was able to have that relationship with them because, they talked the same language.
I know that Doug has told the story a few times of having lunch with Jerry Goldsmith and just trying to convince him to re-record Alien, for instance, and Jerry, explaining why he didn't think he could recreate it, and Doug believing that maybe they could. And that's one of the things that Doug has gone on to do with lots of other re-recordings of the Excalibur recordings.
Yeah.
Difficult scores like Jason and the Argonauts by Bernard Herrmann, which is a crazy, instrumentation and crazy performance, but he kind of pulled it off. And it's nice that at least Jerry did a couple of recordings for Entrada.
Yeah.
And now here we are trying to do a new recording of Jerry's music, another new recording, because we've already done two others in Scotland, The Man and Black Patch.
Well, Doug, I know Doug would be so happy to have to see something like the Chairman coming together. When we were in Scotland, played that bit that's now used for the preview for the Kickstarter campaign, and it made my heart sing to hear that music. Doug loved that music so much that, and Jerry, of course, was so talented, so much variety, so many different styles of music. To hear an orchestra playing that and know that it would be done on Entrada was just so exciting.
Sharp-eyed viewers of that video will see some of us bobbing our heads along to the music because it was so thrilling. They didn't even have the full orchestra. The orchestra for Abbott Costello is probably 25% smaller and missing some instruments, and they still knocked it out of the park.
Yeah, the orchestra is amazing. I think, watching the Royal Scottish National Orchestra play, and again, Chairman, that was sprung on them at the last minute. Nobody, the orchestra, nobody knew that was going to be thrown up for a recording.
I remember that we kind of sprung that on Bill Stromberg. I said, Bill, we may do one more piece, so don't say goodbye to the orchestra after you finish this last take. He said, what are you talking about? I said, just trust me, just trust me.
But Bill and the orchestra, they just did it. I mean, it really speaks to, obviously all of their outstanding musicianship with no preparation, with, Bill didn't have a chance to read through the score ahead of time or all the stuff he normally does to prepare. He just, they're pros. They just stood up and did it, and it sounded amazing.
It's really nice. Now, here we are celebrating Entrada's 40th anniversary this year. Yeah. 800 plus releases.
The 40 years, makes sense to me. The 800 releases, I think it's just, way back when we started, getting everyone done was a major project with, getting the money, getting the logistics, getting everything done, Doug doing his creative stuff. And to think Doug grew it from that to what it is today is just amazing. He'd talk composers into doing stuff they didn't think they wanted to do. He would, correct them when they, did something that wasn't quite right. And, this was Doug's life. It was amazing.
The chairman's important not only because he loved the score in particular, and he loved a lot about it, but as far back as 2023, when we were in Scotland recording a couple of Bernard Herrmann scores, we were having lunch together with Bill and Anna Stromberg and Paul Talkington and some of the other players and engineers and so forth. We would have lunches, and we were talking about the chairman even at that point. So I like to think that Doug's fingerprints on this project. He'll be gone a year this summer, and we all miss him. But I'm moved to think that he's still with us on this one.
On behalf of Doug's family, it means so much to us that the core Entrada team is keeping this going, and hopefully can keep it going, because it was Doug's life, it was his legacy, and the fact that it is still being done in the way that Doug loved having it done, it means a great deal to us. So thank you to Roger and Jeff and Bill and Anna, and I can't even make a long enough list of all the people who are helping to make all of this happen, and that's tremendous.
And we all think about you and Regina and Veronica as well, since you all contributed initials to some of the earlier releases. And I'll let sharp-eyed fans figure that one out. But
I did get an email from someone, after Doug passed, and I've not heard directly from a lot of people, but there was one who picked up on that and who sent me, this is to the famous MAF.
Well, here's hoping that we have a really successful campaign, and that we get to not only record the chairman, but also the stretch goals of other bits and pieces of music that, again, we're not choosing these lightly. These are all things that Doug has talked about wanting to do. So,
and while I'm handing out thank yous, I will certainly also add thank you to all of the people, the customers of Entrada, the people who are supporting the Kickstarter campaigns, all of you who love this stuff like Doug did, and who support it, and with your time, your money, and your attention, and with your heart. I know Doug made people's lives richer with the music that he shared, but you all made Doug's life richer too. He loved talking to the fans. People would call Entrada, and Doug would say he only had a few minutes, and then he'd still be on the phone, half an hour, 45 minutes later, because Doug loved talking about this stuff and sharing it. So thank you to all of you in the audience who also have helped make this possible.
Well, thank you, Marian. I think that sums it up beautifully. And so with that, I think we'll say thank you to everyone who has stayed to watch this, and thank you for everyone who's shown their support. And if you get a chance and you're considering it, please check out our Kickstarter page. The link is below, and we'd love to have you part of the fun.
Thank you, Joe.
Thanks, Marianne. See ya.